A player once gave me a D&D character backstory that was a real piece of work. First, it was devoid of all originality. I think their PC was modeled off some anime character or something, and it was full of tragic overload. You know, where excessive tragedy or trauma overshadows all other aspects of the character. It was also overly complicated with too many twists, details, and convoluted elements. It was inconsistent with the game world, and I had no idea how I could possibly integrate their backstory into the campaign. Oh, and their character is one of these dark-cloaked loners at the corner table in the tavern who doesn't want to work with anyone else. Not that it mattered, because they had zero motivation to adventure, to travel, to do anything besides brood on their dark past, I suppose. However, their character was the exemplar of perfection, possessing not only no flaws, but also a level of power practically unheard of, even as a level 1 PC. And if that's not enough, this backstory was dozens of pages long. They practically wrote me a novella. A novella, by the way, is what like an author writes when they're in the middle of a series and everybody is waiting for them to finish that series, but they're like, I'm gonna show you who's boss. I'm gonna write a novella about what happened before the series even began and make you all wait that much longer. That's what a novella is, just in case you were wondering. I'm totally jaded by an author who did that. I totally am. Guess down in the comments who that author was. I bet there are some people who are gonna know exactly who I'm talking about. I might even have their books on my shelf. And the worst part of all of that is that I wrote that backstory. I was that player. So today, since I've learned a thing or two over the years, I mean, I think I have, I hope I have. We're going to deep dive into how you should write character backstories for your tabletop RPGs, such as Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Dungeon Crawl Classics, and the like. Now, one of the things I find frustrating as a game master is having to flip through massive rule books like these to find basic game information that I use all of the time. And that is exactly why I love these Total Party Chill player mats. They contain all of the quick reference information you need, whether you're a player or a game master prepping your next game session. Combat information, spellcasting rules, conditions, and more. Sure, you probably have a GM screen for in-person games, but if you're playing online and have the Total Party Chill mat under your keyboard and mouse, the information you need is literally at your fingertips. And if you're a player, you could even bring this to an in-person game and put it in front of you on the game table. This mat is like nice and large too, the perfect size, measuring a tad over 30 inches wide and 15 inches tall. I can't do a ruler and stuff while I hold it, but you can see that it's big, and I can't break it. And it's probably waterproof too. I'm sure it's waterproof. Yeah, so when you spill your coffee on your keyboard, you're gonna ruin your keyboard, but the mat's gonna be okay. What's more, there are versions for both 5th edition and Pathfinder 2. So no matter what you're running, Total Party Chill has you covered. Check out these bad boys at the link below. First, let's talk about the basics of creating a character backstory. And to kick that off, I think we should define what a character backstory even is. You see, the backstory serves two principal purposes. First, it's a resource for the player to use when role-playing their character. If you know your character's past, where you came from, your motivations and goals, etc., you're going to be able to role-play them that much better. However, the second purpose that I feel is often overlooked is that a character backstory should also be a resource for the game master to tie the character into the campaign. Also, remember that a backstory shouldn't be the end of the character's story, but rather the end of the beginning of the story. Like, that's hopefully not too confusing. It is, just yell at me in the comments, like that's what you guys always do to me, okay? After all, most likely the most interesting, the most part of your character's backstory is just about to start with the launch of the campaign. Thus, to that end, you should talk to the game master before making your backstory. You want to know things like what they're looking for in the character's history. Ask your GM things like how long they want the backstory to be, how many details it should have, and what kind of details it should have. Also, this is super important make sure you ask your game master how much they intend to incorporate character backstories into the campaign. Not only do some GMs use backstories in the campaign more than others, but some campaigns lend themselves much less to the incorporation of backstories. For instance, if a group is playing a module, it's not unreasonable to expect to see less backstory stuff come up. That's just often the nature of using pre-written adventure modules. However, even GMs who homebrew their adventures might not use backstories too much. Now, I personally think that is a mistake and they're probably missing out on a great opportunity, but that's neither here nor now. This is what I'm driving at. If the game master isn't intending to incorporate backstories too much or at all, recognize that your backstory will primarily be a tool for you to use when role-playing your character. So you might consider not making it too long or too detailed, unless you want to, of course. And especially don't try to shoehorn it into the campaign if the GM has already stated they won't be incorporating backstories very much. On the other hand, if the game master tells you they plan to base the entire campaign or large parts of it on character backstories, you should strive to give them exactly what they need to do that. And your game master should be prepared to tell you exactly what that is. But if they aren't, then just ask and pepper them with questions until they do. By the way, I have a free character backstory template over on the dmlair.com that you're welcome to use if your game master isn't sure what you should give them. And if you're a game master, you might find it useful to give to your players, modified to suit your particular campaign, of course, because it's gonna help them develop their backstories and make that process a bit easier for them. As you're making your backstory, you wanna make sure it fits into the game world and the plans the game master has for the campaign. It's a best practice for a GM to tell players a little bit about the campaign. Often this is done as a campaign pitch designed to get player buy-in and or feedback. So you should know at least a little bit about the campaign. You'll want to know basic things like where the campaign is taking place, what the core themes of the campaign are, and what the intended tone of the campaign is. These are all considerations that will help you mold your backstory to fit in. Next, keep the backstory appropriate for the character's level. This is one of the mistakes I made with my backstory once. I had a level 1 rogue backstory state him as being a master assassin who had risen to the top levels of his thieves guild. And of course that makes no sense. Level 1 rogues aren't master assassins and they don't lead thieves guilds. It would have been far more appropriate to have been an initiate in the thieves guild, and now I was out in the world trying to hone my skills and earn my keep in the thieves guild. Much more reasonable. Okay, the next one here is massively important. Please, for the love of all that is holy, give your character a reason to adventure. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard stories of players who make characters who are like farmers or blacksmiths, and they don't want to leave the farm or the forge. I mean, that's not a good backstory, unless there is something that happens to force them to leave and go on adventures. But if they just want to stay there and not leave, that's like an absolutely horrible thing to pull on your game master. You're essentially undermining the campaign before it's even begun. I mean, unless the campaign is about being a farmer or a blacksmith, of course. What do you expect your game master to do? To spend time every game session prodding you to put down your rake and hoe? Like, if you don't want to play the game, just don't play the game. If you don't like the campaign premise, then find a different campaign to play in. If you want to be a farmer or a blacksmith, find a campaign where you can do that. You don't have to make everyone else at the game table suffer. Find people of like mind where you all want to play farmers in D&D. I don't think you need the D&D rule set to play a farmer, though. There's probably a better system out there for that sort of roleplay if that's what you want to do. Now, as a corollary to that point, is my next one. Your character should have a reason to work with others and join a party of adventurers. In a social game like D&D or Pathfinder, where the premise of the entire game system is that of a united adventuring party, there is no room for lone wolves who hate working with others. Players who make characters like that justifying it through their backstory, because that's what their character would do, are not only undermining the campaign, but also the group dynamics. Furthermore, they are practically forcing the game master to run 2 games instead of just 1. The first game being the primary campaign, and the second one being whatever the lone wolf character decides to do off on their own. Like most game masters, it's enough work to do the 1 campaign. Now you're asking them to run 2 campaigns, and not only 2 campaigns, but simultaneously at the same game table during the same game session. That might be asking a bit too much if you're poor, overworked game master. Now you can kick and scream down in the comments all you want, justifying this sort of behavior and saying that players should have agency to create characters like this if they want. But this is a hard line in the sand for me. If I say that I'm running a D&D game, I'm running a D&D game, which means we're going on adventures and there will be monsters. We're not playing Farmville. And at my table, we run group games. There is no room for a player who refuses to adventure with the rest of the group. Now, if that's not your cup of tea, that's fine. My games might not be for you. The good news is that playstyles differ greatly, and I'm sure there are lots of wonderful game masters out there running games that you'll love. My point is that a game master should respect the type of game a GM says they're going to run and show up ready to play that game. Otherwise, move on and find a GM running the type of game you're looking for, because they're probably out there. Just don't ruin somebody else's game. That's all I'm saying. Okay, 2 final overview points, and then we're gonna move on to what you should include in your backstory. First, it's okay to have a secretive character backstory, but it should not be a secret to the game master. Remember when we said a backstory had 2 purposes? One to help you roleplay your character, and the other to help the game master? Well, if you don't tell your game master all your backstory secrets, they can't effectively do their part with the backstory, now can they? Second, as a player, you should refer back to and use your backstory when playing the game to inform your roleplaying. And you should remember your backstory so that when backstory elements come up in the game, you recognize them. There are very few things more agonizing for a game master than to spend time working in backstory elements only for players to not even recognize them. It leaves us wondering why we even bothered. By the way, if you're finding this information useful, please give me a thumbs up and share this videos with others. And if you think I'm a slimy piece of crap because I place some common sense restrictions on player agency, you know exactly what to do. In fact, you've probably already done it. All right. With all of the high-level basics out of the way, let's take a look at some of the specifics of what you should include in your backstory. We'll dive deeper on each of them, but to list them off, they are background elements, character motivations, and game master hooks. One of the first things to consider for your backstory is the background of your character, and this makes sense. In fact, if you had no idea what a backstory even was, you'd probably assume it was creating the character's background before they became an adventurer. And that's exactly the high-level concept. You want to answer questions such as who your character's parents were they raised in a wealthy family or poverty, large city or rural area. And then you want to consider the significant events that shaped your character's life. What was their occupation before they became an adventurer? What pushed the character to become an adventurer? This might be considered their defining moment. Was it a traumatic event or a major loss? And how did those events impact your character's personality and worldview? How and why did your character choose or fall into their chosen class and skill set? Your character's backstory should ground them into the campaign setting and inform their personality and motivations. Speaking of which, determining what your character's motivations are is the next step, and a massively important one at that. Your character's motivations will impact how you roleplay them, and likely how your game master uses your backstory in the campaign. Consider things such as what your character wants, what your character fears, what are their likes and dislikes? Does your character have some secret that they don't want anyone to learn about? Are they hiding something shameful about their past? And this leads us to the next logical step, determining what your character cares about. Are they seeking power so they can get revenge on the evil mage that burned down their village? Are they trying to redeem themselves from past mistakes? Do they simply want to help the common folk and do good in the world? Are they in it for the gold, perhaps? Something that can help both you and the game master here is determining a few significant NPCs from your character's past that they care about and why. A good rule of thumb for significant player-developed NPCs is to have between 2 and 5, with the higher number for campaigns that will go into the higher levels. These NPCs can be friends, family, or even rivals and antagonists. Any of these are great for GMs looking to incorporate NPCs from your past into the campaign. Just remember, don't go overboard. The GM can only include so much, and you're not the only player. And this brings us to Game Master hooks. Here what you want to do is give your Game Master something specific to work with. Yes, there will probably already be stuff that they can use from what you've already written about your character. But in this step, we want to give them some specific ammunition they can use to bring your backstory into the game. Here are some potential hooks you might give them: an unresolved mystery, a secret that your character doesn't want others to know, or a foil, rival, or enemy involved in your character's past that hasn't been resolved. By the way, for more information on using foils and rivals in your game, check out my video on the topic. I will throw a link down below for you, and I might even, if you're lucky, put it right here above my shoulder. However, for Game Master hooks, be careful not to fill in all the blanks. You don't need to flesh out the specifics of the unresolved mystery, for instance. Some basic information is all that is needed. This then allows your Game Master to run with it and customize it so it fits into the campaign and adventures. Along this line of thinking, remember that whatever you create for your character's backstory is just what's currently known. Your Game Master may add more once it passes into their hands and they begin incorporating it into the campaign. A good Game Master will practice the yes and technique of adding to your backstory, of course, and they should also be careful not to invalidate your past or take your character's backstory in directions that are not in the spirit of the backstory or the game. However, we'll dive into that sort of thing more in a future video I have planned specifically for Game Masters that discusses how to use character backstories in your campaign. Okay, now let's talk about length. How long should your backstory be? In my opinion, the backstory should be short enough to be digested and referenced. 1 or 2 pages is the sweet spot for me. Once we get into the 5-page territory, it's going to be hard for both player and Game Master to reference and find information in it when needed without rereading everything. I once had a player who gave me a backstory that was like 20 pages long, and I won't lie, I don't think I ever read it. I'm sure they loved writing it, and I hope it helped them roleplay their character. However, as a Game Master, I have a lot of stuff to do to prep the game, on top of everything else in my real life, of course. So extremely long backstories are frankly impediments for me. Now, if you love writing long backstories, this is my recommendation. Write your long backstory, dig into that baby. However, afterwards, write a 1-page summary for your Game Master to use and reference. Shoot, you'll probably find that summary useful as well. What about format though? Should your backstory be written as a literal story like you would write in your 9th grade English class? Should it be a bullet list of main points? I don't think there is a right answer to this, but I'll tell you my preference, what I do. I have a backstory template that I literally give to my players to fill out. It's about 2 pages long, and it's essentially a list of questions for them to answer. I found that this does a few things. First, it gives the player guidance on where to even start, because sometimes players just don't know how to make a backstory or what to include. Second, it helps ensure the players are providing information about their character that helps them roleplay and helps me incorporate their backstory into the campaign. Finally, it ensures the length of the backstory is something manageable for both me and the players. Many times we will literally fill out the backstory template as a group at the game table, perhaps during session 0. And that right there guarantees that it gets done, because every Game Master in the world has had players that never ever give them backstories, no matter how much they beg them to do so. But if their butts are in their seats right there, they don't have any excuses. Now, as I said before, the backstory template I use in my games is over on thedmlair.com for free if you'd like to use it or customize it for your campaigns. I will say though that I recently updated it, so if you've grabbed it before, you might want to go over there and get the most recent version. And while you're there, you can check out the other Game Master resources we have for both 5th edition and Pathfinder 2. You might find them helpful as well. I have one final super important point for you to remember. Once you give your backstory to the game master and the campaign begins, it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the campaign. The game master can and likely will play with it, adapt it, and use it to propel the characters and the campaign forward. Thus, if there is some aspect of your backstory that you don't want your GM to twist or poke at, tell them. But that's just what I think. What do you think? Are there some important aspects of creating a backstory that I missed? And don't forget to pick up the Total Party Chill player reference mat for both 5th edition and Pathfinder 2 at the link below. These mats are a great reference tool and they're like indestructible. And if you'd like to know which D&D tools and accessories I use to run my own games, check out this video right here. And until next time, happy game mastering! I don't know where that came from. I'm an idiot.